Thank you, man. So, well, good evening, everybody. Look, it's quite warm, so I'm just going to take my jacket off, and I hope that that's a good start. There's an empty chair here, so hopefully I can sit down and listen to some of your feedback at some point. Let's see that the clicker works. All right, well, while I'm doing that, hands up if you just love making presentations. If you're one of those people that wishes you were at the front here. Awesome. Hands up if it's absolutely your nightmare to be up at the front doing these kind of things. All right, so we've got quite a diverse group just there. And I'll share with you, it's not the thing that I would most naturally want to do. And the fact that the clicker isn't working is one of those things that you wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh my God, aha, I just need a better button. Thank you. Awesome. So wonderful. There we go. So I've already been asked a couple of times this evening. So James, what was your journey to diversity being an important thing? And this is where I have to make the first of what will be quite a few reasonably embarrassing confessions. So the thing that led me to really start working on diversity was that it was clearly a competitive advantage. So very, very simple, bald commercial reality. I figured out that if I was trying to compete for the same talent in the same places on the same criteria as everybody else that I was in the market for, that was going to be very difficult. But if I started to do something that was a little bit radical or to just change the paradigm slightly, then I had a competitive advantage that was allowing me to reach more candidates that were hidden from me, to present the kind of roles that the companies that I was working for had available. I was able to hire at much greater velocity, much greater skill sets, and the end result was a more diverse workforce. But I just want to be in no doubt it was a competitive advantage. It wasn't some kumbaya holy thing, though I'm very attractive to kumbaya holy things. That wasn't the motivation here. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to call out here is just how many people I've had the good fortune, or they've had the misfortune to have me as part of their hiring loop, and it's comfortably 200. I think it's possibly more. That's just some numbers that I can put together as being reasonably valid. So please, if you want me to say a little bit more about that, I will, but I can tell stories about my journey here all evening. But why are we all here tonight talking about this subject? And it's wonderful to see that everybody's here. Well, in normal times, I would say that it is the single most important thing that any of us can do in our careers. But these aren't quite normal times, and our friends at Extinction Rebellion down the road possibly have a bigger shout on what the most important thing is today. However, let's just go with number 2, as being diversity, as being the most important thing we can do. Why do I say that? Well, my bet is that in this room, all of us, our number one motivation is actually to do stuff that matters, to have an impact, to really change things. I'm certain that's true. I'm not even going to ask for a show of hands on it. And my experience of 20 odd years working in IT is my superb skills in database analysis, my unrivaled qualifications as an infrastructure engineer. None of that, it turns out, matters at all. What has mattered are the decisions that I've made in hiring and the choices that I've made. And these choices, we're talking at the very, very front of the problem. Has anybody heard the story of the bald man with the hairy chest? All right, so the bald man with the hairy chest has solved one of 2 really big problems. He's figured out the method of production. It's just the distribution that isn't working so well. So for me, it's very similar in that we spend a lot of time talking about diversity, and that's the method of production. That's getting people in through the door. But a subject for the next event, and I'll be trying really hard to push Ben to think about this, is inclusion. Once we've solved the diversity issue, we have a massive problem around inclusion. But that's kind of out of scope for me today, but I am going to talk a lot about diversity and how we get there. I just, if anybody thinks that I think that's the only issue here, I actually think diversity is a relatively easy thing and inclusion is very, very difficult. But just wanted to mention that just before we move into the other piece. The other thing I want to say, because I'm sure it'll be on a lot of people's mind as I go through some of the content here, is that I talk a lot about gender diversity. And it's a pretty reasonable question to say, well, what about all the other diversities? Diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity. Well, we're technical people, and the data on gender is just better than anything else. So I don't think of gender diversity as being more important as any other stripe of diversity. It's just the one with the most data. So that tends to be where I start, because I can back up my belief with data. So to do that, look at this, how not to make a presentation by pulling pieces of paper out of your back pocket. This, however, is bang up to date from the UK government website and their study on gender pay gap. And why do I bring this up? If anybody, well, actually, you're all the converted. I'm assuming you're here because you believe this is important work. But just to ground it, we are so far behind where we need to go. And the only data that I have is for gender pay gap. I don't have anything else. Now, the analysis that I just ran, and I did this in the hotel just before I came out, you can ask me to send this on to you if you want to see it, or you can do your own scrub on the UK Gov website. But I looked at Google, Microsoft, Oracle, and AWS, and the results are alarming, right? If anybody thinks there isn't work for us to do, let's just try a few of these out. And by the way, if there's anyone from Microsoft in the room, you're doing way better than the other guys. So pat on the back here. So for Google and Microsoft, men and women are in the bonus pool equally. How cool is that? Great start. Unfortunately, if you happen to work for Google, while you did get a bonus and you're female, you got 48% of what the men got in their bonus pool. If you work at Microsoft, again, equal amount of men and women got bonuses, and they're within 7% of each other. So good, pretty good job there. If you're at Oracle, 39% of the bonus pool went to women, and only 17% are in the very top quartile of pay. I'll come on to that in just a second. At AWS, women only got 32% of the available bonus pool. So a lot of work to be done there. I can give you some other numbers. So I looked at what the top quartile was. So you would expect that to be 25%, right? Everybody with me so far? Quarter, 25%, great. So Google, fantastic news there. 21% of the employees are female in the top quartile. Microsoft, 22%. At Oracle, only 17%, and at AWS, just 14%. So there's a plenty of other numbers to look at there. And what brought this measure home to me and its importance was I was asked to talk about diversity by Facebook, and I'm in their office talking about that, and there's a guy from an insurance company, and he was really pleased with himself because he came along to say, look, in all of we've looked at all of the jobs, and there's almost no gender pay gap. And I just challenged him to say, well, add up all the money you pay everybody. Are you telling me that 50% of that went to the women in your company? And of course it doesn't even come close. So this is still an incredibly important subject for us to all tackle, and I'm going to try and give you a few of the things that I believe enable us to really make a difference here. So I'm going to talk about getting out of your own way. I'm going to talk about being curious, how to be magnetic, and then we'll talk about questions and advice. And as somebody picked up, this is just for the people who don't like presenting. It's great to have a device that separates you in people's minds. So I don't do question and answer because that's a bit arrogant to think that I've got the answer, but I've absolutely got advice, and I'll invite everybody else to join in around that as well. All right, so let's get going with getting out of your own way. I want everybody in the room to imagine a tuba player. That's not somebody who plays a trumpet, or it's a really large brass instrument. Is everybody there yet? Can you imagine where this person lives? Have you got some thoughts about that? Maybe some physical attribute, maybe even a name. All right, well, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but this is what I think when I imagine a tuba player. I imagine that they're male, overweight, maybe some military bearing, red-faced, perhaps a northerner, quite good at man-spreading. So these are the things that pop into my head when I think of a tuba player. Now, the wonderful thing about this room is that this is a safe enough environment for me to share with all of you my bias about tuba players. Now, who else had something similar in mind? Right, here's Fritz. He's my tuba player. He's exactly who I imagined. Now, one or two of you, much more enlightened than I am, will have imagined this wonderful young lady and her tuba playing. But the reason I bring this up is, imagine that I'm hiring a tuba player, or I'm hiring for a software dev. Is there anything about these attributes that are important as I go to interview or think about hiring that person? The only one that might have any help bearing here is that being overweight might give you more lung capacity, but even that's pretty spurious. So I just want everybody to think about this in terms of, it was safe for me to tell you all that these are my biases. But I was able to call those biases out and say they don't help me, so I'm going to put them to one side. Now imagine who in this room works in an environment where the culture would support you saying, I don't want to work with people of color. I don't really want to have a female boss. What if I have to think about which toilet I go to because we've now got transsexual people in the building? If it isn't safe for me to declare what my bias is, it becomes very difficult for me to put it one side and just say, interesting that was my first reaction, but it doesn't help me as I go to hire people, so I'm going to put it to one side. Now I'm going to tell you a story about the hiring of Jacinta Qua. Now I have to tell this story as the second, or maybe the third. The tuba player thing was mildly embarrassing. This is a true story of where I was very fortunate to be a new enroll manager of a team of about 380 professional engineers in Asia Pacific. I was new into the role. I was new into that department, and the instructions were hire, go. James, you need to reach about 500. Go hiring. And of those spots, I knew that I wanted to make a difference, and I really wanted to hire I wanted to make an advert about what I wanted to do and set my stall out. So I called my recruiting consultant, and we sat down and we had a pretty robust conversation about what it was that I wanted to achieve. And I laid out all of the important things that I wanted in that candidate. And oh, by the way, if we could find a wonderful candidate that happened to be female or happened to come from any other of the diverse attributes that I was looking for, that would be really wonderful. But I really wanted to make a signature hire with this person. So telephone loops were set up, and eventually I ended up on the phone with Jacinta. I think she was in Jakarta, I was in Singapore. We just couldn't get our agendas sorted to be together physically, and we had a telephone conversation. Now, you can see that with at least 10 years behind me, I think I know what I'm doing when it comes to screening and recruiting. So I've got my set of favorite questions that I love, and I went through them, and this candidate just didn't meet the bar. I'm sure she was at IBM, maybe Dell, and I'm sure she was good there, but this was not a Microsoft hire. This was not somebody that was just exciting me and giving me the go, which I was quite surprised about, because I really trusted the recruiting consultant that I worked with, and her advice had been very sound many occasions, but this just wasn't working. So I put in my no hire. And the recruiting consultant came storming into my office. Sneha, it was you, so you can just wave at everybody here. Sneha came storming into my office and said, "You're wrong." Okay, about which particular subject? You're wrong about Jacinta. She is absolutely the right person for your team. She's a phenomenal hire. You must have made a mistake. You must have got that wrong, James. Whatever else, I'm just going to set up another meeting, and you have to do better. Go and say hello to Sneha at any time. You'll know that I have made this way milder than how it actually was. So the week goes by, and finally Jacinta comes into my office, and hand on heart, it's not the same person that I had the phone call with. This is the most magical addition. I would be so lucky to have Jacinta on my team. And I had to go back to Sneha and say, yeah, you're right, let's get the offer out, let's get her in. And she went on to have a couple of years really great success. And what I learned through that is, it doesn't actually matter why I had some kind of bias or filter that made telephone interviewing not give the candidate the best experience. It doesn't matter what. I still don't know, and maybe someone has some feedback for me, but I still don't know why I'm not a good phone screener, particularly not for some of my diverse candidates. But what I learned there is that never again would I hold an interview that way, and when we were getting down to this is somebody that could join the team, that I would always make that commitment for it to be face-to-face. Now, I went on to make many more mistakes with Jacinta. So she joined my team, and the first thing I did was to put her in charge of diversity and inclusion. Well, isn't that what we would all do? So poor Jacinta, she got to live with me, learning to overcome some of my bits and pieces. But I just wanted to share that one with you. Now, where I got something right with Jacinta was that she taught me the importance of something that I talk about as being platforms. Now, this is more of the inclusion piece. So now you've attracted, you've recruited, you've hired somebody on board. What are you going to do with this high-performing superstar now? And my single piece of advice around this is to create genuine platforms for success. So what happened at Microsoft with the Engineering Excellence Forum? This is the closest to a real hairy engineer boys club that I can describe to you. If you were on the Engineering Excellence Forum, you were king of the swingers. I mean, really. So when I put forward Jacinta to be my representative on the Engineering Excellence, and this meets in Redmond, Microsoft Holy of Holies, So people sending me emails, you've got to be crazy, James. She's well, one, she's not a real engineer, whatever that meant. And I was okay. Well, do you only ever talk about real engineering? What about excellence? Okay, yeah. So we just banged ahead and just gave Jacinta what she needed to do to take her place on a really important platform. And it would have been way too easy for me just to have left her on a diversity and an inclusion board and think that I was doing the right things. What really made a difference was insisting that my star player got to be on a star platform, and she had my complete sponsorship to go ahead and do that. So these are I've given you a few examples here that I've bracketed under getting out of your own way, checking in, learning what your own biases are, making sure that you find those you find those platforms. But I'd love to know if what you've heard from me, if you'd just like to share back anything in terms of lessons that you think we can learn, or perhaps some examples that you have of your own. And I hope there's a microphone hanging around here somewhere that we can use. Great. So anybody like to just tell me what they've taken while I grab a quick swig of water?
What was different in how you conducted yourself in the first and the second interview? So why was Jacinta, was it just face-to-face, or did you ask different questions? Did you conduct yourself in a different way that made you more open and amenable to her than in the first interview? Yeah,
it was 100% me. I think, accepting that was the lesson that Sneh had drummed into me. There was nothing wrong with Jacinta. The fault was with me. And I suspect I was so comfortable with my process, and I'm on the phone, there's a few other things going on the screen here, I've got, which meeting am I going to next, and I think I was just going through the process. I'd got a lot of people to hire, and my culture insists that if I'm in front of somebody that I pay attention to them. And I think that was the number one difference, was on the phone, I just didn't give her the chance to shine and to tell me stories and to engage my curiosity, which is pretty much what you need to do to get a job if I'm the hiring manager. Does it resonate for you though? Have you been in a position where you hiring and you?
Yes and no. I think there are definitely.
Conversations I've had recently where your hiring decisions get based on experience. So you've got two candidates and somebody's got much more relevant experience, who tends to perhaps be somebody from a traditional route into that space, rather than capability, which could come through in a multitude of different ways, but may not be quite so immediately evident. So I'm thinking in marketing. Marketing agencies, they'll say, well, people who come into marketing are typically from middle-class white backgrounds. You don't tend to get a lot of ethnic diversity there, and they're not sure how to crack that.
Okay, well, I've got something on that. Sneha, I threw you in it. Do you want to say anything about your side of that experience? What?
Well, I think for me, with the Jacinta one, I think I knew you very well as probably the attention piece, like some of the competency interviews and everything that we did. I think James and I worked very well in the type of person that we wanted with the team. So we almost always knew unsaid who would be in the team, and James was always open to being challenged in terms of the diversity aspect of the team. So that was the piece that I felt she really brought to the table, which she probably didn't see in a telephone interview. She brought she brought a lot of the skill sets to the team, which we already agreed in terms of the basic skills. But I think he didn't see the additional diversity or the complementary skills she brought that he didn't have in the rest of his team. So I think over the phone interview, he probably missed that. But in a face-to-face, when you see somebody you know and you immediately position them in the rest of your team and what they bring to make the rest of your team better as well, I think that's probably the piece he missed on the phone, which in the face-to-face you probably saw to make the rest of the team better as well. So that was what I wanted you to see. Yeah.
So is there anybody sitting with a burning thought in their head around this idea of getting out of your own way, checking what your own bias is in order to just say that's not helpful to me? Anybody else want to say anything? I will.
James, sorry, I had a question there. So being, from a, recruitment as a profession, obviously deal with interviews on a day-to-day basis, and notoriously in the sort of technology industry, you go through a phone interview and then a face-to-face. So I guess those sort of messages resonate, and I can think of multiple sort of experiences now where I've had a candidate that I thought was brilliant and sort of hasn't got through that, and I guess banging your head against a brick wall. So I guess the question is, firstly, would you always advise, if possible, and if, same time zone, same place, that you always do a face-to-face interview first to sort of maybe nullify any of that unconscious bias? If so, how did you go about that? And also maybe some advice for someone like myself, how would I go about educating my clients on doing stuff like that?
Well, I think there's huge numbers involved here. So we are going to filter out people that we shouldn't have. I think you just have to accept that. What's worked overwhelmingly well is a trusted recruitment professional, and working with somebody who I trusted to tell me that I was right or wrong. Just I think I did a good job in a terrific brief. So I think that made life a little bit easier. But working with recruitment professionals, I think, helps you take out some of that bias that you didn't intend to. But things have moved on. I only had Skype back then. We've got a plethora of different video pieces. There's no excuse to have a phone interview with somebody unless they have a good reason to not want to be on camera, which is completely valid, right? I can imagine many scenarios where that wouldn't work, but always offer it. If you're going to have a phone call, why not turn the video on and just see who's at the other end there? Great. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Please. Let's get the.
Just on that point.
More than one mic.
So I'm in HR, so obviously we're supposed to be helping the managers and the in-house recruitment, whoever's doing the recruitment, actually give the candidate a chance and help make the right decisions. But some advice for candidates that have come from different backgrounds, and that, so I include myself in that, is walk in the shoes of whoever's interviewing you, because they need to feel comfortable with you. It's all about a relationship, and I think, so from a recruiter point of view, it's really helping to coach the candidates as well about who is involved in the recruitment process.
Yes. I think it's a very good point, and the advice I'd make on it is about inclusion, where inclusion is a two-way street. Now, one of the most uncomfortable conversations I had with Jacinta was one time, and this wasn't all Jacinta, by the way, I'm just using her as a proxy for all of these conversations, but I opened the door for her to go through, and she stood back and said, "What's that about?" And I can just feel my mother's hand on the back of my head if I had not opened the door. And it took me a few weeks to really think this through and figure out, oh, actually, this is an occasion where my cultural norm is something that you have to include in your reference as a two-way street. So it's actually reasonable for me to say, look, it is a cultural norm for me to hold open a door. There's nothing else going on here. It's not an expression of patriarchal power or anything. It's just how I was brought up. So I think it's perfectly okay to ask somebody to accept and to be inclusive of their culture as much as anyone else's. So I'd push your managers and your recruits to think about, well, what does what's the two-way street in being inclusive here? Thank you. All right, so I'm going to move on to Emma.
Hi, this is probably a devil's advocate question, maybe even best held till the end, but I'm going to pitch it anyway. You know, I'm a person of colour, and I've not had a problem. I've not experienced any of these suggested challenges. I seem to get the jobs. I guess I'm curious as to how prevalent this situation really is, and how do we know if it is?
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here in this building, because 20 years ago I started work in Great Pulteney Street in Soho, just around the corner here at Microsoft. And my abiding memory of this place, this tiny little place in the world, and I was reminded of it just today, is this is one of the most diverse places on the planet, not just in the UK, not just in London. It's incredibly diverse, from food, from the people you see on the street. I dare say it's reasonably inclusive as well. But my experience is that this is the one, maybe the 2%, and I'm thrilled to hear your. I'm thrilled to hear your perspective, and that's awesome. But I have so much more experience where the opposite was true. I'll use just the example in Singapore, which has something like 50% Chinese ethnicity, and on my first day in that new job, I was thinking, what are my priorities here? And everybody wanted to tell me what my priorities should be. And one of them was, well, you need a really great admin. You're just going to go under if you don't get a good admin. And then they'd whisper, get someone Chinese. And I said, what's going on? Well, the real power is in the hands of the Chinese in Singapore. And it's true. So just because something is true doesn't mean that you just have to accept it. It was just one of those things. Knowing that that's true, what am I going to do? Or knowing that that bias is, it's perfectly authentic within me, what am I going to do to set that aside? So it sounds to me as though you've had a great experience of people not bringing any kind of bias, but just judging who you are and what you can do. Or maybe you do a great job of presenting who you are in a way that makes you a very attractive employee. But I do think you are a small minority for the sake of the argument in this room. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of curiosity, and again, this is just I happened to solve some problems by being really curious about what was behind them. One of the jobs I was given was to start up an offshore networking team, and this was going to be in Hyderabad. So off I went to Hyderabad and sat down, and I'm briefing the recruiting consultant, who was not Sneha. And I'm saying, well, I want to really, we're going to invest in full-time employees. It's not going to be for contractors or consultants. This is such a critical role that we're going to invest in full-time employees who are going to have stock. So I really want the very best network engineers that you can find me. And the guys all super excited, yes, James, we can do that. That's going to be wonderful. And off I go, and I fly back 2 weeks later. I'm like, great, let's have I've got 2 days of interviewing to do. And after day one of interviewing, it's something really clear and obvious is that there is not a single woman on this hiring loop. And as I look through the names, I'm doing my best to figure it out, but I don't think I'm going to see anybody the next day either. So I just call a complete halt, called the recruiting guy in and said, dude, what's going on? Oh, James, please, you have to understand, Indian parents don't want their daughters running around in dirty data centers. I'm like, you have to be kidding me. And he's like, no, you have to understand, James, this is just, no, this can't be right. And again, I wish I was smart enough to have the answer at my fingertips, but I had to go and think about it overnight. The next morning, called him up again and said, hey, you know what I'm looking for here, the common denominator for anybody getting this job is that they're CCIE, right? The Cisco certified internet engineer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up my friend at Cisco, who runs their university, and just ask him, what's the pass rate by gender breakdown? I call him up, and it's 34%. That's a good enough number for me. So I call the recruiter and said, in CCIE pass rate in India is 34% female. That's the minimum bar for you. And I could see the pain on the guy's face. You know, I've hit him with data, so there's no way he can go with this. So we reset the loop, we come back, we have a loop that now has some really, really interesting candidates, highly skilled, completely qualified for the job, and I end up being able to give a couple of those women a start at Microsoft. And then, you know, I sat down with them a few months later and just said, look, what happened? Why weren't you ever on the hiring loop? Why have I never seen you? And they said to me, oh, well, Microsoft's not the kind of company that hires women. And I had no idea that, of course, I mean, it's so obvious, but the companies that we work for have a persona to our candidate pool. And suddenly the importance of getting the message out from college higher upwards that Microsoft is a great place for a female networking engineer to come work became the mission for the next few years. And guess what? I hired more and more, and I got such a fantastic team because none of my competitors were looking. They were all thinking exactly the same as the Microsoft recruiter was on that one. And so now I think I know what I'm doing. So when I got moved to Shanghai, and I spent 3 years in Shanghai, and it was a complete bootstrap. I was really, really excited to get the job. No staff, nobody, nothing. You start from zero, James. Oh, that's fantastic. I can recruit my own team. What a lovely position as a hiring manager to be in. And I get there, and I see these people coming through. Not a single person would I give a job to. So the recruiting consultant's getting really stressed. I'm getting really stressed. And in the end, she says to me, well, James, I just don't think you've described who it is you want to hire very well. So I just went through it. Well, I want somebody who's really curious, who's got technical depth, that wants to work their way around problems, doesn't just give me all the answers, but asks really great questions. And she's looking more and more shocked. And yeah, but those kind of people don't get into university in China. And that was the penny drop moment. That kind of person doesn't get into university in China. It's true. So if they don't get into university, what happens to them? And she said, well, probably in some internet cafe playing World of Warcraft. Awesome. I don't mind spending a few hours in an internet cafe playing World of Warcraft. So that's exactly what we did. And in fact, we put Microsoft hiring onto some mouse mats and just took them through a few of the World of Warcraft internet cafes in Shanghai. And guess what I ended up hiring? I hired people who were born knowing how to work around the great firewall problems, that absolutely knew which VPN was going to work and which sockets we needed to set up, how to run their mobile phones. And it was that same team that I ended up going into battle with Redmond HQ. Does anyone remember Bing Maps? Yeah. So all of the dev went to China for Bing Maps. And the MVP, the first viable product, was for bus routes in Beijing. And the guys in Redmond were like, James, don't tell me you've spent 6 months building something for bus routes. I mean, who takes a bus? Okay, have you been to Beijing? You know, just everybody. And so you know, it ended up getting forked, and the bus pieces of Bing Maps ended up releasing only in China. What a huge mistake. But anyway, so that was that's my Shanghai internet cafe story, and it just shows if you get curious enough, if you ask the right questions, then the answers are out there. And making sure that the people you want to hire know that you want to hire them can be all that you need to do some days. So again, I've said a few things. I want to get some water. So if there's anything resonates here, or you'd just like to share back some key message from looking in unusual places and getting curious. But yeah, over on this side.
Yeah, I just have something that's pretty much an echo of what you've been saying. I've had a similar experience about 2-3 months ago when I'm a hiring manager in a new role. I've got about 4, 5, 6 different agencies that are helping me hire. And there are just no women coming through. All of the CVs that I'm seeing are for men, so I just have a lunch with each of the recruiter agencies, each of the recruiting manager, and I tell them, look, I'm looking for diverse people. I don't care where they're coming from, or don't care whether they're male, female, what color they are, what creed they are, it doesn't matter. Just give me the best people. And then I started seeing more diverse candidates. It's just the recruiter, even though you've never talked to them before, they have their own biases. People have their own biases. You have your own biases, and other people have biases about who you think you are as a company and the kind of person that you're looking for. So just making that clear is great.
And that's why it's the most important impact that we can all have, because that's just a choice. You always have the choice to say, this isn't right. Well, it just doesn't add up. We don't live in a world that is all men. Thank heavens for that. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of being a magnet. So making life easy for yourself by having talent find its way to you. So this is very. So I'll just give it. Sorry, it's a sideline. For those of you that don't love presenting, when you get asked to do it, one of my pieces of advice is never put what you're going to talk about on the slide, because then people don't pay attention to you. They just read the slide. But this one, I just think there's some really, really important lessons here. And these are really good life lessons too. This works for you if you're currently dating. It works for you in many different environments. So, just think about what's your perfect candidate doing right now. Well, it might be in this room, right? They might be in a World of Warcraft internet cafe, but just think it through. If I know the sort of person that I want to hire, what are they doing right now? Where would they be working or hanging out, chilling out? This opportunity to put mouse mats, beer mats into the cafes was just a wonderful way. And again, those people that we hired couldn't believe. They thought it was some con. What, really? You want to be hired by Microsoft? Fantastic. And who will their friends and influencers be? And this is important when you're thinking about your social media profile, what it is that you say, what are the topics that you're constantly tweeting about or that you are blogging about, seem to care about. This is an opportunity for you to be a magnet. But don't say bland stuff. Nobody gives a damn. So you have to sort of push yourself to be a little bit edgier about what it is that you believe in. And this takes a little bit of self-discovery. What are the things that you won't be pushed over the line about at work or outside work? And I would encourage you to go and find those forums, find who's influential in those places. Because if these are really the candidates that you want to hire, then it's your only opportunity to speak and to talk to them. Now, there's another piece of advice that I didn't put on the slide here, but worked really well. And again, I'll give the recruiting consultants that I worked with credit for helping me be smarter about this. And that it's that we do a lot of work to find the one candidate that we're going to hire. And then we hire that person. But there were 4 or 5, maybe 3, at least a number, who were really, really great candidates. And that if you had 3 or 4 jobs open, you'd probably have hired 3 or 4 of those people on the loop. So why not develop a method to stay in touch with those great candidates? It can be for a technical meetup. We're very lucky to be working in the tech industry because we have little gifts for techies all day long. We're doing a new code drop, be part of their beta program, help us do some usability testing. There are so many different ways that you have, and go back to that candidate pool and keep them interested, keep them excited. So next time there is an opportunity to hire somebody or backfill, you can snap straight in. But this is not easy work, and it needs real commitment. And again, if you're fortunate enough to have a great hiring consultant you can work with, there's some work you can do there. But your whole team needs to be part of that process. So just having everybody understand that you're all a magnet, you're all the reason for the team to come in. One problem though with going to your team is that you'll get a lot of people who look like the team already looks. So if you're really trying to make cultural change, then just be cautious that you're not just fishing in the same tribal pool, because the results won't surprise you if indeed that's what you're doing. I want to talk a little bit about candidate A and candidate B. So we're now moving into the technical realities of how we run our pools. And I have to give a lot of credit to this guy here, Andrew Haldane, Chief Economist at the Bank of England, or at least he was when I first saw this work reference, so I'm not quite sure if he's there. Now, this rubrics cube over here is beautifully diverse. It's a lovely illustration of what we're actually trying to get to. But there's a reason we don't get there, and we end up with a rubrics cube that looks like this. So the research that the Bank of England did, and honestly guys, it doesn't matter who it doesn't matter that it was the Bank of England. There's nothing particularly special about them here. But they analysed the personality types of 200 middle managers in 2006, and 70% of them shared the exact same profile. Now, I remember being at Microsoft when Myers-Briggs was all the flavour for a while, and the only question anybody wanted to know is, what's Bill? So Bill is actually INFJ for practitioners, and almost nobody at Microsoft is INFJ. They're all ENTJ. And so everybody would try to benchmark themselves as how like Bill am I, and talk about a wrong goal from a personality type. But I think we can all recognise that 70% of them shared the exact same profile, and the chances of that happening quite by chance are close to 1 in a million. So something else is going on here, and it's that hiring managers very deliberately choose to hire people like them. And in fact, I've even seen that thought institutionalized. Who's ever been on a hiring loop and heard the words, good fit for the team, right? We've all been. What we mean by that is like us, like my tribe. Good fit for the team. It's going to be easy to manage because we share a whole bunch of the same values, If you ever hear somebody say, I want this person because they're a good fit, I want your anti-bias radar to just go, Rah! There's a problem. There's a real problem there. Sir?
Why would you advise that when you would be thinking you've briefed a team on what sort of person you're looking for? You're looking for X skills, X type of person. I think I'm right, thanks.
No, they won't hear you on the video. That's the...
Super English. Thank you. Why would you advise doing that when you've given a profile of the type of person you're looking for, the kinds of skills you're looking for, and that would be a good fit? Why would you say no?
It's about the language, and this is where words are really important. If you were to say a good hire, I'd be all right. If you were to say a good candidate, I'd be okay. It's the word fit that is where the danger is. Because what you really want is somebody that doesn't fit, that has angles and pieces that are unusual. And I'll show you why. And if I don't answer it well enough, try me again. But the language, it's specifically the word fit. Right? It's that idea, oh, they'll just slip in. It's not going to be any difficulty here. So here's what a lot of us do when we're looking through our candidate pool. We devise our tests, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and these could be what those particular questions are, or what that particular personality issue doesn't really matter. And who do we, of these two, who do we give the job to? Well, we give it to candidate A because we've set out a criteria for what we're going to measure for. But what we've missed is that candidate B answers the questions in a way that is completely different to the rest of the team. Because I'm assuming that the tests and the criterias are built up of norms that already exist. So what we have here is a candidate who has a very different way of thinking, a very diverse way of thinking. Now the challenge, if I give candidate A the job, everything's going to go smoothly, except I'm really not going to have built a diverse team. But I probably won't be fired. It'll all go well. If I hire candidate B, I have somebody who thinks really differently in a couple of very critical areas. Now, I may have solved the diversity problem, but I've got a much bigger problem now, which is the inclusion one. How do I make this person part of the team, to feel validated, to feel that this is the place where they can do their best work? So for me as the hiring manager, it's the hardest thing I can do is to select candidate B. But again and again and again, that's the candidate that is actually going to be the one that thinks in a different way, that brings me a different perspective, that becomes a really cutting edge advantage for me. So I'm looking very specifically at you to see if I've answered your...
I love that answer, sorry. Man.
No, that's good.
I like what you're saying, but I'm really critical because if the test is, and I won't get into it, but if the test is giving me what I needed, and the green tick box for candidate B is they're a bubbly person, for instance, and I'm being flippant for a particular reason.
People do.
Then is that necessarily what I'm trying to achieve? And if my test is set out for what I'm supposed to be looking for?
Yeah, I think that I've got a couple of criticisms, and one is I don't think we set good tests, right? So maybe you're better than me, and you write tests that are better. As a general example of what we would normally do, and where there's an opportunity for us to do something radically different, I'm just suggesting that where I've done this, and where we've profiled people that are deliberately going to give us different answers or have a different viewpoint, then our success with candidate B then becomes a matter of inclusion, and did we really invest to give them the opportunities to survive. But where we did, it became a real edge. It really transformed the outcomes for us.
Could you just give us an example of that?
From a person or from
where you found that you had a bias in your test?
Yes.
You adjusted the test, brought in a person that gave you that edge, and what the edge actually turned out to be.
Yeah. So I've done it. I've done it for teams that I was expanding. Because I know it works, I did it completely at the last Oracle team that I built. I very deliberately profiled who works at Oracle right now, and then went to find people that were completely different to that. So if a typical thing would be computer science masters, right? Or some background of working in cloud industry. So I put those aside and said, well, what if I hired people that instead of that were more over here? What else would I get out of it? Now, I have to be honest, it was way more work for me. Right, the inclusion piece for this team made life really, really difficult. And I learned some very valuable lessons. Maybe we'll talk about it offline, but I remember telling Ben about this, that I discovered something that I believe to be possible to be impossible, or at least I don't have the skills to do it. And that is to have a radically distributed team where there were no two people who were actually in the same physical office together. Everybody on my team had to join a conference call. So I thought, well, that's a nice equalizer. Everybody has got the same issue. But it was too much. And that team didn't perform. They weren't happy. They weren't happy with me. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that we just never had that sense of tribe. Whatever our diversities were, we never got to come together physically to hang out with each other. And that was it's quite a profound learning. And it's something I'm a little bit disappointed with, because the arc of my career has taken me from working in an office where I had my name on the door and everybody knew where I was, to not having an office at all, working remotely and being very comfortable in that space. But I couldn't take a team with me. There were individuals that it worked for and individuals that it didn't. But yes, I've used this to hire and build teams, some of them much more successfully than that example that I gave you.
So is there a preference then towards hiring people based on, I guess, a lower bar and then without a certain set of competencies on specific skills, and you grow that?
No. You should don't misunderstand me about that. If I'm hiring for a tuba player, you've got to be able to play the tuba. I'm just setting aside all of the things that I would usually think were important for tuba players that aren't there at all. So no, you should never hear me talk about this as being a lowering of a bar. But my experience is we don't do a great job of describing what's actually important. Again, I'll just share something with you. I have a thing about oral hygiene. So if I'm employing somebody to be a software engineer and their breath was filling the room and just, I used to find it impossible. I was like, I can't work with this person. But it didn't tell me anything about their ability to write a piece of code, and nor should I have allowed that, or should I have allowed their lack of bubbliness. Now, it's going to be different if it's a marketing role, or it's a sales role, or a customer-facing role. I've got to have some customer-facing skills. But none of those say can't be disabled. But yet, I think I was barring disabled folks from coming in to the office. And I went as far as to actually I hired somebody who needed to bring their seeing eye dog into the office, and this was in Singapore, where dogs are a cultural anathema, but it was a guy I'd hired, really super smart data scientist, and it just didn't matter. So we found a way for him for his dog to get there. The point is, be open to the idea that the person that you would normally have rejected might be the diversity candidate for your team.
So would you then recommend that you have some redundancy in your screening process, whereby you have multiple initial telephone screens so that you have diverse, assessment of people?
I think the way that you solve this, everyone's going to go about it a different way. The point to make here is just to be open to the idea that if you don't change something, you're not going to change the outcome. And if you think diversity is something that we can get to, I don't know, it's just not going to happen unless we are really radically looking at, well, where do we attract our candidates? Why do they apply to us? What's the screening experience like? What's the interview loop like? Can they imagine themselves working here and being super successful? That's really what the message is. So, did you?
Thank you. Yeah, you've spiked my question to a point, because I agree with what you said to part of it. Something remains unanswered, though. Those criteria, you touched on this earlier, I think it defines what you need in terms of taking your area forward. So you should be defining the skills you need. Why wouldn't that include that thinking differently aspect that you touched on? I think that's valid. I think what's not valid is that if the right candidate emerges that meets that criteria, but they happen not to be part of a diversity programme, I would disregard the diversity programme because it solves my problem. And I guess, touching on my earlier question, which I didn't follow up on, my own experience suggests that, but I think a lot of people do see the world as, I've got a problem here, I want it solved, and I don't care about their background. And I just wonder if maybe people that apply for roles that maybe aren't able to compete against others of whatever colour or background, they're blaming this on something that may not be relevant. And by the way, I don't have a view. I don't know. I'm not naive, by the way. I just don't think that perhaps we can always blame that the reason someone won't get a job is because they're not white and middle class and Oxbridge educated.
Yeah. No, I don't think we disagree hugely. I think it's my perspective here is to start with. Let's just accept that I'm the problem. What can I change? All right. Well, we've kind of had some of the, and I love that. We've got straight into the interactivity. But is somebody sitting on a burning question that they want to get out? Just particularly on that piece around attracting candidates.
So I wanted to make a comment about the questions earlier put forward by yourself about if you've got a really good test, which is meant to identify really great candidates for a particular role. And for example, if you're looking at developers, you want to have a consistent set of coding tests, for example, which they have to fulfill. Completely saying, oh, the one who gets them all wrong, but those two right is a different candidate, therefore I should definitely consider them, might be a bit far to jump immediately. But something that you can definitely do is when you're constructing your questions, and this is something that we've done, is that you segment your questions into different groupings. So you have questions which are the ones which everyone needs to have to fulfill, and these are the ones, and you can lower the bar on that as much as time you have to review things. And then you have a second pool of questions which it doesn't matter whether they get it right or wrong, and you spend more time looking about how the candidate is answering them and what their problem solving is. And you can actually also make those questions almost impossibly difficult, so that you can assess the candidate's way of thinking and then look for diversity in that instead.
And you've reminded me of an important nuance that Mr. Haldane talks about a lot here, which is this candidate got this question wrong, this person got it right. So it's not saying everything was equal. So that is an important nuance there.
I just wanted to add one thing, I think, to your point here. One of the things that we did, James, also was one thing I think you started with yourself to say, what can I change? But also through the process, what you can do is to keep yourself in check again and again. So one of the things we did was to have a diverse interview loop as well. So typically when we used to hire for those particular roles, we had those 3-4 people marked out who were quite similar in the same team hiring for that role. But what we said is, if you're hiring for India, we'll have somebody from China interview. If you have somebody in China, we'll have somebody from Australia interview who are from very, very different backgrounds. And for some roles, we also used to have an as appropriate interviewer, the last interviewer who had nothing to do with the role, not in the same team, completely oblivious to that technology problem, but as appropriate, completely as a different person, to view the person as a person and what they bring. So I think adding those checkpoints through the process to enable you to challenge yourself is also quite important.
Thank you. Thank you. So,
I just wanted to go to something that you talked about that I really agreed with, which was social media for attraction. Okay, so bit of a rant. So I'll make this as simple as I can. For the recruiting community, if you do not see the word programmer or developer on my profile, don't offer me program or developer jobs. Okay, tip 1. Tip 2. When you express that you'd like me to do an introduction to somebody that I know, and then I ask you, so do you follow this guy on Twitter? And you say, I don't have a Twitter account. In information security, it's embarrassing. Okay, so don't do that. And the second thing is I think generally what we're looking for is what is the value that I could bring to an organization up front? Because if it's a startup, that may not be my thing. And then we're not going to waste a whole bunch of time. So I think being upfront about what the role is and the expectations around the role, rather than this back and forth kind of chit chat that wastes everybody's time.
Yeah, no, can't disagree with that.
When I'm hearing a lot of stuff, especially some of the questions, you can hear the biggest sort of question or answer somebody wants is around certainty. It's like, I want certainty around the candidate. I want certainty around the test. I want certainty around the answers. I want certainty to know that they're going to be a good candidate. I want certainty to know that when I take this job, it's going to be the best job for me. And I think the things around people is that there is no such thing as certainty. So you have to take a bit of a risk. And that whole part of diversity is that in this room right now, everyone is so uniquely different. And that's what's so beautiful. So let's just sit and think, if somebody does think a little bit differently or act a bit differently, what value is that bringing to my organisation? So for me, I just think, let's question ourselves around why do we need to be so certain?
No, I like that. So we're into the questions and advice piece of the day, and so I'm just going to rattle through a few little bits of advice that I'll just share with you. So not everybody's going to celebrate your growth. And, you know, I've got people in the room that have known me for a long time, but there are plenty of others who will quite happily say, "Wow, Jimbo, what happened to you? You know, I remember you at Alta Vista where you were, you know, just taking everybody dancing in Cinderellas." And there's plenty of people who look and say, "Wow, God, you changed." Well, that's what we call growth. But I just want to be very clear that as you move into an area of saying, I really want to impact diversity and inclusion, there are going to be people who aren't as joyful about your evolution. I'll just say that. This one, I think, is really important, and it sort of speaks to what I was saying about, you know, I have a culture which it's fair for me to ask somebody to be sensitive towards at some point. And we've all seen people that do this, you know, the manager that suddenly wants to be right on or down with the kids or whatever it is. And it's so dreadful. It's cringeworthy. But I've seen candidates feel like they have to do that as well. And in your interview loops, see if you can come up with some questions that really dig into what's authentic about the person that's in front of me. You can even ask them, what's the line that they could never cross no matter what? That's always quite an interesting answer. So yes, don't try to trade your interest in diversity by pretending to be somebody that you're not. And if you're not upsetting somebody, well, then you probably didn't try very, very hard. Equity and equality. I get asked this a lot, and it is so important. When we talk about diversity, it's easy to think that we're talking about equality, but we're not. We're talking about equity. Now, I try to show the difference in this graphic, but for me it works like this. If I'm getting onto an aeroplane, I want to know that the most qualified person at flight school is flying that aeroplane. I don't care what the diversity mix is. I don't care what the spreadsheet at British Airways says about the number of female versus the number of male pilots. I just want the best pilot. So I'm not interested in equality. What I'm interested in is that if my daughter wants to fly for British Airways, that she has every opportunity to go ahead and do that. So they're unclear here. Equality is a non-goal. Equity is what it's all about. I just need to talk about Vigdis just for a little bit, because she discovered and put into something in practice. And so there's only the second slide where I've actually said what I'm going to talk about and put it on here. But she was elected as president of a Nordic country, Iceland. She was president for 16 years. And she was sat down and asked, well, what were the things that she made a big difference in? Because the data talks for itself. It's one of the most inclusive countries in the world. It's held up as a great as a great model, and Stanford University acknowledges that female members of Congress are actually getting more, of the Senate, are getting more work done than their male counterparts. But how did she bring about change? And she has a really simple view of this, which is the power of three. Now, you'll just have to bear with me on this one and say that most of us would agree that the ideal span of control or number of employees in our direct team is 7. And what became really powerful for Vigdis, she had her cabinet, and it was all men, and she discovered that it was a pretty cozy club when there was these 7 of people who were all a great fit. When she brought in one new person of a very different colour, thinking, doesn't matter what it is. For that one person, she'd created a ghetto. It was a lonely, miserable place to be, where the easiest thing to do was to try to be as much like the other people on that team as possible. When she brought in 2, and she moved to have 2 ministers, they were quite an effective little gang, terrorized everybody else. Nobody wanted to upset them because the gang was going to come and tell them off. But when it moved to 3, complete culture change happened. And it's a very, very powerful rule. I was fortunate enough to hear her speak about it, and it was a goal for me in all the teams that I've managed from my direct team, is just to try to get to at least 3 people who didn't feel like they were the same as the rest of the cozy little gang. So that's all of the advice that I had prepared. So I'm standing in between a few more drinks and talking to each other, but really happy to take any questions and to offer advice, and perhaps you all have advice that you'd like to share back with the room, and maybe there's something that I didn't touch on that you really wanted to hear. So just
Hi, I'm Kesh. I chair a voluntary organization, Bay Mean Games, Black Asian Ethnic Minority in Video Games Industry, and we meet every last Tuesday of the month. And I had an interesting individual who approached me. He loves saying use my story and use my name. Is Roll7, is a video games company. They've done games like Ollie Ollie, skateboarding, mostly fighting, very testosterone sort of driven games or so. And they're a remote team which happen to just where I hot desk is where they come in for a meeting. So just setting up the scene of that. He approached me and just said, we are 7 men and we just have no diverse application ever. We've tried really, really hard at everything. So we have this monthly meetup. I said, why don't we do this? I usually have an ethnic minority speak at our monthly meetups because I want to encourage that. Why don't you speak? Tell us more about yourself, and then let the audience question you why they wouldn't apply for a role in your team. Which was amazing. I didn't know what was going to happen. What happened is he basically said, this is our roots. We were in Deptford. We used to work with underprivileged kids. And then it was a multimedia company, and then video games came up, and I started writing video games, and I did all, and they've won a BAFTA award for the Ollie Ollie game as well. Incredibly successful. And so all great. So it's just like, okay, I opened a question. Why would you not apply for a role at this studio? And their website is what we came up with, 7 dudes, and it was all about the games and everything. And then somebody from the audience said, what you just said about your Deptford and working with underprivileged kids, etc., that's not on your website. Right. And he said the most amazing thing, which is a lot of, I think this is what I want to get to, he said, I just thought that would be showing off, so I didn't want to put it on there. And he said, no. And so everybody in the audience empowered him, and now it's on his website. And that was such a simple thing. I think a lot of, including myself, sometimes you just don't want to show off the good work you're doing. And yeah, such a simple thing.
I think there's a second thing which leaps out at me, but it's a great story. The second thing is that it's at 7 o'clock in the evening or something. Well, you've just ruled out anybody that's got young kids to look after or other. So think about an 11 o'clock meetup or a 3 o'clock meetup, before school pickup or something. These are that creativity in just, who did I just rule out by something that seemed very obvious to me? But it's a great...
The main reason for that is, again, it's a voluntary organization, so we are entirely relying on venues. So the event took place at a trade office, which unfortunately they wouldn't let us use it during the day. So even BFI, etc., the number of locations we have them, and all of them, unfortunately, after 5:30, they're more than happy to have us.
Well, I want to hear that they're actually hiring. So, so it's not just 7 dudes anymore.
Yeah, they are actually. Well, they got good candidates. I'm not sure if they've hired,
Brilliant.
but yeah.
Brilliant. Great stuff. I think there was a question here. I'll come to you.
How do you persuade people that diversity is a priority for people who aren't impacted by, say, discrimination, even after you show like experiences from other people, the business benefits of diversity, the greater improvement in terms of cultural for greater diversity? Yeah,
like I said, this isn't some kumbaya fluffy thing. This is hard commerce, and it was a competitive advantage for me to fish in a different pool. But the way I would start that conversation, and by the way, it's quite a brave thing in 2019 to say, I don't think diversity is important. So I'd give someone some respect for just saying that. But I just walk them along to a bunch of customers and just say, what do you see? In Microsoft, I wanted to think my customer was one thing, but I had to do IT support for my auntie, for my mum, for my grandmother, for my daughter, for my... I'm very, very conscious of who my customer is, and they are much, much more diverse than the team that I hired at that point. And I'd just start there and see where the conversation takes you, because if you want to address those customers, then you have to think like your customer. You have to understand your customer, and you're never going to do that if you don't have people that look like those customers. Start there. There's lots more, but start there.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I wanted to ask, I'm really, really curious. You were talking about inclusion being the real challenge and the difficult thing once you make a diverse hire. Yep. So how do you actually go about including the diverse and very different person into your team? You were mentioning that you've been successful in this.
Yeah, and this is why it's advice and not an answer. I can only tell you what I've done and what I feel is working. But there may be better ways. So I know it's really, really important. So what I can do is to say, I'm invested with a certain amount of power, so I'm going to just declare inclusion as being really important. But then I have to ask for the team to help, for everybody to take ownership that inclusion is something that all of us have to do. So for the guys that want to have go to the pub in the evening after we've had a team meeting, just stop and check, is that something that the whole team wants to do? Well, it turns out that there's at least one person struggling with alcohol issues, where a pub is a really difficult place. But that person being able to tell their story was extremely powerful, and just people just got a little more sensitive about it. So number one, who owns the power? Make sure that you're giving it to the team to say, no, inclusion is really important for us, and just question and just be alert and aware, because almost everything you do, Monday morning, my typical team staff meeting for me 20 years ago would be, let's talk about the rugby, the cricket, the soccer, what happened, and some silly story about what our wives did. Right? And this happened. And it's only when you stop and just think, wow, who did I just exclude from participating? Because not only have I done it, I've made it clear that this is how you join my cozy club, right?
I just wanted to follow up, just one little thing. If you just make that diverse hire, and after that you start having those conversations with your team, doesn't it put the person on the spot? a bit in an uncomfortable way, because if you had the conversations all along, that's fine, and if you were encouraging your team before the person came.
And again, I'm lucky. Poor Jacinta, she does still talk to me. I made those mistakes with Jacinta. She was where I got smart and sensible, because it was Jacinta who would quite happily go, look, if you boys are all going to talk about rugby and soccer, there's no point in me coming in on a Monday morning. Call me when we get to the important piece. And then the really brutal one for me, because it was a big thing to learn, was I was talking about my son who'd been unwell over the weekend, and my poor wife was up at the hospital with him, as we speak, and she was like, well, why aren't you there? Oh my God, I hadn't even given myself permission to say, hey team, I've got a sick child, I'm at the hospital. I just assumed that it would, and so these things, it's tight, it looks like small details, but they're so powerful. So if you can, I think you have to start by being quite humble and just saying, all right, I know I'm going to get lots of this wrong, but I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've been stocking up my questions. Thanks for your advice. So first,
I'll get some water while you unload.
Thanks. So first question is about Jacinta again. So how do you conduct your interviews differently now, having learned that the phone interview failed?
Yeah. So, and this is a personal choice, because I'm not suggesting that everybody here has the same level of dysfunction between phone interview and face-to-face. But I take it as my problem. So if I'm interviewing somebody in Amsterdam, I'll get on a plane and I'll go to Amsterdam, or I'll get on a train now because I'm more eco-attuned. Extinction Rebellion just down the road. I will go on the train to Amsterdam and I'll meet that person and just make sure that I've given them the very best chance of showing off who they are before I make those hiring decisions.
But on the phone, you could have interviewed 5 people.
Yes, but I won't make a no-hire decision unless there's a technical ineptitude. Right? If you're asking a program manager, what does your risk register look like, and they don't know, then sorry, we're done.
Can I ask my second one if there's no other one?
Yeah. Go on.
So second one for China.
Man who holds the microphone, very powerful.
So what gave you the courage or the guts to reject the best talent you could find in China? Holding out for, I'm sure you were under pressure from Bill to recruit 100 people in 1 month.
God.
To find the right person based on your culture needs, based on your fit.
I only had one conversation with Bill, where I was midway through explaining the problems in moving Hotmail out of a single location. And he just said, no shit, James, and walked off. So conversations with Bill, not my favorite subject. But on this one, I was under terrific pressure. And I was being sent the very finest graduates from computer science, Guangzhou University and Fujian. They were coming to me expecting to get the rubber stamp straight in. It was easy to stand my ground because the simple ability to ask a good question was not present, and that was a above the bar criteria. If you can't ask a good question, you're just not going to work out in my team, because that team, it was Microsoft, an American corporation in China. Just knowing the answers to loads of stuff was going to get us nowhere. I needed people who were prepared to scratch their heads and say, I wonder what would happen if, so that was just and I didn't get anybody on that interview loop who could ask a decent question. Just nobody. There's, I think there's a question at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think you hinted at in terms of China and Singapore, and in terms of advice, one of the things that I've struggled with is where we're also being heavily pushed in terms of cultural transformation. So that's kind of another part of the melting pot that we have to worry about? And say the team's working and there's diversity in the team, how do you manage that aspect of it, where half the team go for a curry, half the team go have a pint, half the team speak a totally different language? How do you cope with that? Is there any advice around that?
Well, my first piece of advice is don't necessarily listen to what I did, because I've really made some mistakes there. And it is super tough. I'll just tease apart two things you've said. You said where the team's working really well and there's a lot of diversity. That hardly ever happened. What it was is that if it was an Indian team, all the Indians did just great, loved it, awesome, top marks. But if you happened to be Korean, you were in real trouble. If you were a Japanese manager and I asked you to look after the Korean team, they would form a queue outside my office telling me this is just the worstest thing you can ever do. And in many occasions, I was beaten down to accept the business outcome over the diversity that I wanted to see. So the reality of just how ingrained some cultures are, but it's unfair to pick on Asian cultures or as those. I have the same problems in Poland. When I tried to put a French manager in charge of the Poles, that didn't go too well. And this cultural issue is really critical, but it's the inclusion piece that's where I would move to. So Ben, I've already set this up. If the next time we come together, we should be talking about how do you drive and sustain culture change? How do you build an inclusive team and workforce? Because these things are really hard, and it takes years and years and years to be successful. And often it is easier to take a less diverse solution. How much time? How many more questions do you want to?
We've got the venue till 10. There's quite a few.
Good God, man!
So I think maybe one or two more. I'll round it up and then we get to finishing some of them.
Awesome. Right. So if you've got a burning question, get your hand.
So my background's completely different to what I'm doing now, and in my last company I was on the diversity committee, and I worked really hard at having a diverse workforce. I was part of the hiring process and I made decisions. And one thing that always bothered me, and that was me growing up as well, was I was never given the chance to have my first ever job because I didn't have experience. And it was like an endless loop of, you don't have experience, we can't give you a job, but how am I going to get the experience if no one will give it to me? So I actually wrote my dissertation on our degree and qualifications more important than experience. And it turned out that experience was a lot more important. But then now I'm in this new industry in tech where people are looking for either a qualification or 4 years working with XYZ framework or whatever it is, when actually, like you were just talking about those guys in the internet cafes, you hired some of them. And it's like, I'm like kind of banging my head against a brick wall at times when I'm like, how can we get people away from that? I want 4 years of this, when actually that person that's sitting in their cafe or has done this huge project by themselves might be much better than that person.
No, thank you for asking, because I think this is really important. And this is where each of us has the opportunity to make a choice that can really change the outcome. So if you say, well, I want 5 years experience of PHP and Apache, that's really important to me. Well, you won't get people that learn new technologies really quickly, right? That's what you won't get. So if you think about it, and well, what I really need is somebody that can learn fast, we get a very different candidate pool when you say, you just have to show me that you can learn a new framework, you can learn a new language, you can learn a new development tool quick. If you show me that, I'll give you the job, because I'm certain that in 6 months' time you'll need to learn something else anyway.
But is that as simple as someone's done that with their own back? It's like that, I want to learn this, I want to try this.
Yes. Yes, people that are good at learning stuff do it all the time. and it might be that they learnt the tuba last week, and then they learnt French, and then Python looks interesting. You can't help them. They can't help themselves. But if you test for the right things, for the things you really need, then you'll have a better outcome. Experience of what? I mean, why does that help?
What you can do is, if I was a recruitment agent, I could help back where. I agree entirely with what's been said. It's unenlightened. What's wrong with pushing back and asking a question? If they require 5 years experience in technology X, why?
Why?
Get the answer. Then you'll see if you found it or otherwise. More likely otherwise, you will find the idea.
Right, because there's almost, how many, I've been in the internet business 20 odd years, and I'm trying to think what technology has stayed the same throughout. And other than HTML, I'm not sure that there's anything that's actually stayed much longer than 5 years. God, I used to hire people for Dreamweaver. What?
Perfect. Well, there's some thirsty faces and some even emptier glasses. So I think we'll wrap up there. So can we have a big round of applause for James, please?